Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I rise to speak in this debate, Mr Chair, as somebody who has experience of being an English teacher for over 23 years before I entered this place. And as the honourable gentleman said, there are certainly similarities in the kind of behaviour that you might encounter. But I do have a particular interest in this debate from that perspective. And I don't think, Mr Chair, I've ever been involved in a debate where there has been such consensus about the need that all children from all backgrounds deserve the best start that we can possibly give them in life, regardless of the circumstances into which they are born. And for that reason, I want to thank the honourable member for Kingston and Surbiton for securing this debate today, and indeed for encouraging this consensus that is so unusual in this place. And the honourable member from Barnsley Central pointed out, I think, something that we would all agree on, that if a child starts school and they're not school ready, then the entire school experience from primary 1 right through to the end of secondary is tainted by that. At worst, school is a very negative experience, and at best, it's tolerated. We've all talked about the importance of increasing the hours for early learning and childcare to 30 hours a week, and of course that's to be applauded, but I want to pick up on some of the points that have been made. I think fundamental to that isn't just providing childcare, it's providing qualified, professional, experienced staff. And in Scotland, when this 30 hours are rolled out, there will be an addition of 600 new early learning and childcare centres with 20,000 more fully qualified and professional staff. And I think that's very important when you're rolling out extra childcare for the purposes of making sure that children are school ready. But we can make all the policy decisions we like, Mr Chair. We can sit here and pontificate and perhaps even throw investment and money and resources at this problem. But fundamental here is the experience at home. We need to support parents at home as they bring up their children, particularly those who live in poverty and face much more challenging circumstances than we or they would like. And I want to bring perhaps a new dimension to the debate this morning, Mr Chair, because I believe that fundamental to child development, fundamental to being school ready, and fundamental to being a good citizen is instilling, and then fundamental to a happy life indeed, is instilling a thirst for learning, an inquiring mind, and we do that through cultivating a love of reading. And I believe that that must be nurtured in our children. But in order for us to nurture that in our children, we need to nurture that in our citizens as widely as possible. And that's why I will always argue and I will always kick against any attempt to close libraries, particularly those in my own constituency. I don't believe that it's possible to talk about closing the attainment gap or to talk about raising attainment if you deprive your citizens, particularly those in socio-economically disadvantaged areas, if you deprive them of access to books, because that is what closing down libraries too often means for too many of our citizens. I believe that access to books for parents and for children, as parents raise their children, is fundamentally and inextricably linked to raising attainment. If we want our children to come to school with inquiring minds, we must introduce them to books as early as possible. Not just those living in poverty, but especially those living in poverty. We must support and encourage parents in their endeavour that they read with their children, that reading becomes part of what is done at home.
And the member for Norwich North talked about the fact that the most needy families don't necessarily engage. The same applies to books and libraries and getting people to go to libraries. What is the Scottish experience that's getting people from deprived communities into libraries and accessing early childcare as well?
I'm very glad the honourable gentleman raised that very point, because in Scotland we have an initiative. We've got the Book Bug campaign, we've got the Play, Talk, Read, Write, Count campaign, and every parent with a new child is given a bag of free books for their children, and that experience is repeated intermittently as the child goes from birth to the age of 5, and that is supported in nurseries where books, and you talked about the Imagination Library, where books become integral to raising attainment. I don't think it's possible to talk about raising attainment unless books are a big part of that equation. And I am delighted that that's something that the Scottish Government has taken on board. And I despair in any part of the UK when I hear of libraries closing down, because I know what that means. That means depriving people of books. And I grew up, Mr Chair, in a family where if I didn't have access to a local library, I would not have access to books, because the school library, such as it was, didn't really exist. And I think it's fundamental that to a happy life, to a fulfilled life, to feeding the imagination, to feeding creativity, and indeed to feed the mind, access to books is fundamental and must be part of this conversation. The cost of, very often when you hear about libraries being closed down, it's always about cost cutting. We can't afford it, we need to make cuts. And there are some things, Mr Chair, that you cannot count in pounds and pennies. And I would argue that what you get back in terms of informed citizens who are encouraged, supported, particularly those who have children. We obviously want to reach out to people who don't have children and don't access the library, but we're talking about the next generation here. And I think you need to think about what you lose rather than what it might cost in pounds, shillings and pence. And the Scottish Government's Book Bug and Play Talk Read Count campaign is universal support for parents, regardless of their socio-economic circumstances. Everybody has a stake in this. So closing the attainment gap is very important. And early intervention is the canvas on which we must paint everything that we do. And that early intervention must be about the love of reading and instilling reading into our citizens and as they become parents. We can't afford to leave too many of our children behind and not having them school ready and a full school life, and that creating all sorts of social problems in the future. So how we support parents with young children is our investment in the future, and we must, in all conscience, from an ethical point of view, try and create a more inclusive educational and social environment for our citizens and as they grow up and have their own children. We owe it to our children and we owe it to our country. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Lorena.